Hello, my name is Piotr Galis and I work as a front-end developer for Codyline. Welcome to the next episode of React in Mobix series. This time I'm going to talk about practical examples, and this topic has been divided into several parts. And on the first one I want to show you advanced data store with RxJS. Before I start, I need to warn you, this presentation may contain opinionated content. It's not suitable for classical single-page application, and it has been not validated with server-side rendering. What kind of not trivial fetching features we have in single-page applications? The first one is cancellation while refetching or unmounting data store using classical promises with fetching API. You need to write some abort controller, you need to keep this instance somewhere and call it whenever you need, and this may cause some issues. Retrying when backend is failing, so we want to retry many times until some connection is back or maybe the server errors are gone. The polling when we want to refresh our UI state based on changed data in the time on the backend. Also, the question when to start and finish fetching data is not so trivial, but the most complex issue is to have all those items combined together. This is the most complicated situation that we can have in our single page application. Why I chose RxJS? Because this is a powerful tool for data streams management. It has built-in HTTP client which supports cancellation. You can build with that unlimited strategies declaratively. I know that this is not easy to start with, but in my opinion it's worth to learn. It has much more wider usages, not only for fetching data in UI. You may use RxJS on backend side, and also observables are the common pattern in other languages and platforms. Alright, so let me show you how I want to achieve data fetching using RxJS. I have Mobix data store, RxJS stream, and API server. First, I will use the toStream utility function from Mobix utils library, which converts Mobix reaction to RxJS stream. So everything that is touched in this reaction is going to trigger RxJS stream. Later, inside the configured RxJS stream, I'm going to call API server using HTTP request, and when this HTTP response is coming to RxJS stream, I'm going to set this response data in the Mobix data store. Alright, so let's do it on some examples. Let me introduce you the basic application that you are familiar with the previous episode. So we have the users page with a list of the users. The UI has been executed API call for the backend to get two users, John and Mary. But in this episode we have a new page, the details, where we reuse data from previous API, where we display first name, last name, and email of the users. So here in the header and in this card, we see data from the previous API call, and we have also new response for the user's audit trail, which is taken from another call, and this endpoint requires user ID in the path. So we also have a path with ID in the location, and user may choose to see or to show or to hide this audit trail section. And we have also direct links to details of John and Mary. So currently we have the Mary, and now when I go to John, we see that the name in the top bar has been changed, also here, but we still see old data from Mary. To get new data from John, we need to hit refresh button, or we need to refresh the whole browser. So now I want to show you how to fix this problem easily with RxJS. So let's jump into the code. The users module provides a user's data store that you are familiar with the previous episode. And this user's data store is responsible for taking data from API for list all of the users. And we have also provided two routes. One is for the users list, and the second one is for the details. The details component is wrapped with user details with location higher order component, which synchronizes location parameters with Mobix store. So all the stores inside this module may inject location details. I'm going to talk about this location store in the next episode. Alright, so let's go deep into the user details component. This component provides user details data store, which fetches data for audit trail, and also user details view store, which is its own facet to all the data. Okay, so we see that user first name and last name is rendered at this part. Later we have the toolbar with a refresh button, switch for audit trail, and two links for John and Mary. Later we see that our store is exposing users loading boolean, which is connected with this API. So when I refresh this page, you see this circular progress spinner at the top of this content. Then if there is no user error, we display the card, and on the top of this card we see this list item text with user's name and email, and below, while audit trail visible flag, which is synchronized with this switch, is trophy, then we see either the circular progress spinner or errors when the backend responded with the error. And if everything works fine, then we see the list of the items retrieved from the backend. Alright, so let's see how the user details view store is organized. This view store injects three dependencies. The first one is location store, which holds data of the browser location like paths, search. Then we have user's data store, which is used for exposing users loading, users error, and the user data. User details data store is used for booleans like details loading, details error, and also audit trail list of the elements. And also the refresh button is executed in user details data store. So this is delegated to action of another store. All right, so let's go to user details data store, which is used to fetch those data. This one injects location store, so this data store has access to browser location. It has own state, and this is how I recommend to organize your state in the Mobix stores. I'm providing private property state where I'm storing everything that is connected with this store state. So everything outside this property is not really its own state, but we have properties like injected stores or services. We may have other properties, but everything what sits here is its own state. So if you want to synchronize this state with, I don't know, local storage or IndexedDB, then it sits only here. And if you want to expose this state outside, then you need to provide computed getters, which delegates to this state. It's a bit boilerplate, but this strict distinction between state and other properties really improves the readability of this class. All right, so this data store in the constructor calls the method read, and also refresh action also calls method read. At the beginning of the read action, we set the initial values like empty response, loading true, and empty error. Then we call backend API, passing the location ID from here. And then when backend responds, we set our state with those data. And while we have some error on the backend, we set also error property and loading to false. Okay, so now it doesn't work perfectly. When we hit multiple time a refresh button, we see that we have a lot of pending requests, and we are lucky that the last one responded at the end, and we have our state set from this request. But what if we have different response times? Then we have a racing conditions, and we are not sure which response has set our state. So first we want to get rid of this approach, and I'm going to introduce RxJS and replace this read functionality with RxJS stream to simplify the process and fix things like changing the user and refreshing the data with only one pending item. I'm going to start to provide a new action, setup read, and I'm going to use the from RxJS to start the stream, and to stream helper from Mobix utils to convert reaction. And what will be my reaction? I'm going to rely on location store params ID. All right, and this toStream utility accepts as a second argument fire immediately boolean. I'm going to name it to be more readable. And there is one issue, that the TypeScript type of this toStream function is not compatible with RxJS above version 7, so we need to cast it to observable input, and yes, my value is this, and then we can use pipe, and what we should do first, it's always to console log what we have in our stream, and tab is from RxJS operators. All right, let's see on the console what's going on. Of course, I need to change setup read in the constructor from the old one to the new one. I will fold that, and let's see what happens. Nothing, because we didn't subscribe to this stream. All right, now we see that our console log printed ID1. When I change to Mary, we see the Mary ID. So now we have the beginning of the stream where initial value is the ID of the user. All right, so once we have ID of the user, we can call the backend API. All right, so instead of tab console log, I'm going to use switch map from RxJS, where we can switch it to our backend. And it looks like the get user details method from our user's HTTP service is a promise, but we want to have a RxJS stream instead. So I'm going to duplicate those methods with a sign of the dollars at the end, which means that this is a RxJS stream. So I need to add also get dollar method to my HTTP client service, which is generic, where we can have a path, and it should return observable from RxJS, type of generic res, and we have Ajax utility in RxJS Ajax, which has getJSON function, and what we need to do is to construct our URL. All right, so we have HTTP GET client, user's HTTP service retrieves that. All right, so we can use it here, and we need to use our request, which is user ID. All right, let's see in the network. We have our API working. So when I switch to Mary and switch to use John again, we see that this RxJS stream is working correctly. So what we did, we converted Mobix reaction to RxJS stream using this utility from Mobix utils. Then we switched our RxJS stream to Ajax client, which calls the API, and that's it. And we have everything called, but we don't see those data in our application. So next step is to set the response. Alright, so we use running action wrapper from Mobix, and our state response should get the response. Let's see how it works now. Alright, we see everything. Now it's time to fix some minor issues like spinner. So before we call the backend, we should set our state to have loading flag true and error empty, and when data are back we can set loading to false. Alright, I think that's it, and see how it works now. Okay, when I switch to Mary, yes, I see the spinner. So we have working loader done, and it's time to refresh. Currently refresh calls the old read method. I will remove it, and now it's not so easy to refresh the stream. So because we want to trigger this stream again, I'm going to use some workaround. I'm going to provide request trigger boolean flag. I'm going to add it to my state type. Okay, and the refresh button is going to toggle request trigger to its opposite state, so from false to true and from true to false. And I'm going to return this value also in toStream converter, and then its array. All right, and then request is an array, so I need to wrap it like that to destructure it, and let me save it. Okay, I'm going to clear the network and hit refresh button, and it looks like it works fine. When I switch to Mary, we see number 2. When I switch to John, number 1. And now the test of calling refresh button multiple times very fast. Wow, what you see here is cancellation of HTTP request by RxJS Ajax stream, which did it automatically for us. So whenever this RxJS stream is cancelled, and it's cancelled when toStream emits a new value, and toStream emits a new value while either location parameters ID, either state request trigger is changing, then all pending items has been cancelled. So that's why using few lines of code and replacing the promises based fetching logic with RxJS stream logic, we get for free the cancellation feature out of the box. Now it's time for the polling, because we want this audit trail to be loaded infinitely. then not hard thing in the RxJS stream. It's enough to import the delay from its package, and let's say that every maybe 3 seconds we want to refresh the stream. All right, and see how it works. I don't touch anything, and we see that our application fetches those data again. And what will happen when I switch to Mary? We see number 2. Yes, it works fine again, because our stream, after changing the URL path, has been terminated, and the new stream has been started with new ID, and now the Mary is refreshing its data. All right, what if I click refresh button many times while we have also pending the polling? It works fine, because when I hit refresh button, it again cancels the whole stream, no matter if the current point was after this delay or before this delay. It just cancels the whole stream, and it works fine. So those features like fetching, polling, and refetching are working fine without a glance. All right, so let me go out from this page to the dashboard, and now it looks like our details data store, which should not live anymore because we left our user details page, it have pending stream. All right, so let me change this code, because we subscribe to this stream, but we have never unsubscribed. All right, so in the constructor where I'm setting this read functionality, I'm going to attach the subscription from RxJS package, right? And in the dispose method, which is called by React IOC while the component is unmounting our data store, I'm going to call, how it was, no, unsubscribe. All right, when I save it and I go to the user details, wait for polling, now go to the dashboard. Okay, it looks fine. The data store has been terminated and my stream has been unsubscribed. All right, so currently we have almost everything working fine. Now what if I turn off the network? Then my stream hangs. I didn't cover the error, so we need to use another operator, retry, which is dedicated for handling RxJS failures, and we can configure some delay. And we can return timer here. So for example, every 3 seconds, when backend is failing, then this stream will try to repeat. All right, let me simulate the failure offline. Okay, we have 1, 2, and another tries. Now when I turn back, it works fine. Of course, we should also update our state that we have some network problem. Okay, let me save it and offline. We see the error message here. When I fix the network problem, everything works fine. All right, so using those few lines of code, we supported very complex problem of handling and retrying to reach again the backend. With these few lines of code, I handled the errors coming from the backend and also retrying on failures, and you can configure the time after which RxJS stream should try again. You have access to the backend error. You have access to the counter of retrying. For example, you can print it out the user. So let me show you how it works. You may also want to use this number to increment timer between next retrying calls. For example, maybe it's senseless to call every 2 seconds. Maybe first call should be after 2 seconds and the next one after more. Let me show you the example. Retry count. Of course, I need to fix. Okay. So you see that this one has been executed after 1 second, this one after 2 seconds, this one after 3 seconds, and it grows as our retry count is growing. Of course, you can limit it by math min, like maybe 5 seconds should be enough. So you won't increase this number infinitely. All right, so we have very complex UI data flow configured by RxJS stream, and there is only last question that left: when to start fetching the data. Okay, let's go to the more fancy example. I'm going to use this audit trail flag to be false as a default. And currently there is no sense to retrieve the data because I'm not watching them. I want to fetch data while user is triggering this switch. Okay, let me show you how to achieve that. Let me go to the user details data store where I'm configuring the stream, and I'm going to get rid of this, save. All right, now nothing happens because I stopped that. I'm going to use on become observed tool from the Mobix, and it works like that. If the response property is going to be observed by any React component or any other observer, then this callback will be executed. Let me show you how it works. So when I switch it and it works multiple times, we see the callback that is executed while observer is trying to get this property response from the state. No matter how this user details data store has been injected into other stores and by the computed properties and so on, the Mobix gives you ability to just track if this property is observed anyhow. So I'm going to paste here the start of the stream. Alright, so at the beginning we see only users API first. Alright, and now when I switch audit trail, we see that we started the new stream. So wow, it works fine. What happened if I switch multiple times? Then it looks like we have a bunch of streams concurrently retrieving the data, so we need to fix that. All right, we have another tool on become unobserved from Mobix, which works similar, but on the opposite way. So if this response property has been unobserved, then this callback is executed. So what we want to do that here is to unsubscribe the stream. All right, let's figure out how it works now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, we see that now it works better and we see only one stream running at the same time. All right, but on become observed and become unobserved should be cleaned up when this data store is destroyed. So we need to remember those handlers here and some properties. Let me do that. It's just a basic function. And yes, we can call it on the dispose. Like that, so we are sure that this callback won't be ever executed while we destroy the application. And how it works with the fresh button, I'm clicking that and nothing happens. When I switch and start the stream and I hit many times, turn off and on again and refresh button, it looks like it uses only one single API call in the time. So all the previous items are cancelled. When I switch to Mary and I switch off and I go to other page, the stream is stopped. So our code for handling very complex user interaction for fetching data from the backend has been configured only in user details data store, nothing elsewhere. We didn't have to use user effect in components to refresh the data or start fetching. Everything was configured inside this data store with tools like onBecomeObserved and unobserved, and a little bit complex, but maybe not so much, the RxJS stream, which is able to fetch and cancel requests based on location parameters from the user browser, and it also supports the errors, polling, and refreshing button. So this is very complex interaction with few lines of code. You can say that React Query library is able to do that even simpler, and I agree with that, but React Query currently is very hard to integrate with Mobix outside of React hooks. I heard that they started implementing more generic way how to integrate React Query with other libraries like Vue, Svelte. Then maybe it will be much easier to integrate also or synchronize React Query with Mobix state. I'm going to try this approach in the future, so I will let you know while I'm finished that. All right, so let's go to the summary. To configure complex fetching behaviors using RxJS and Mobix, you need a few tools. Ajax, which supports cancellation by default, the toStream, which converts Mobix reaction to RxJS stream, and optionally for conditional fetching, you can use onBecomeObserved tools from Mobix. So you can start fetching your data directly in the constructor of data store, or you can postpone it using onBecomeObserved to fetch it while user is really watching your data. And to convert the Mobix reaction to RxJS, just use toStream, and to implement refresh button behavior, I think the refresh trigger boolean toggle is the easiest solution as I found. So that's all about connecting RxJS to the Mobix, and thank you for watching. Link to the code is in the description, and see you in the next episode. Bye.